I'm delighted to introduce to you Mark Henshaw, who is actually a former student of mine. And it's always wonderful when your students go off and do great things, and then you feel exorbitantly proud, you know. So Mark is one of the people who makes my maternal heart proud. So let's talk about Mark. Mark is a senior analyst in CIA's Information Operations Center, where he has spent 10 years studying cyber threats to the United States national security, particularly the use of information technology by terrorists, organized crime, and hackers. Henshaw co-founded IOC's Silent Horizon Wargaming series, which runs biannual war games that focus on complex national cybersecurity topics. The findings are briefed to the White House, the National Security Council, the Departments of State, Treasury, Defense, and Energy, and to numerous other organizations. In 2007, Mark received the Director of National Intelligence's Galileo Award for Innovation in Intelligence for his paper, A National Security Simulation Center, co-written with Rachel Hennig and available online. A graduate of the Sherman Kent School's Advanced Analyst Program, he is an emeritus member of the CIA Red Cell, in which they get to think outside the box instead of inside the box. He is also the recipient of 15 CIA Exceptional Performance Awards. Henshaw received a BS in Political Science, an MA in International Relations, and an MBA, all from Brigham Young University. His master's thesis, I believe I was the chair of that, wasn't I? Focused on the application of theoretical frameworks of war to cybersecurity and was nominated for the Western Association of Graduate Schools Distinguished Thesis Award. In addition, I'd like to tell you that Mark will be giving a short presentation, informal presentation, on how to get into a career with the intelligence community. And that will be tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. in room 257 of the Kennedy Center, which is just across the hall that way. So all of you are welcome to come to that. Whenever you can drop in. You don't have to come in right at 10. If you need to come in at 11, that will be fine as well. Mark will still be there. So let's take a moment and welcome Mark Henshaw.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I don't even know if Valerie will remember it, but about 12 years ago, she and I were having a discussion in her office. She had started writing a book on the effects on society of essentially gender-targeted abortion in third world countries and the kinds of effects that has on society. And she was concerned because while this has always been a problem, it had become an increasing problem in recent years at that point, because medical science had invented small portable ultrasound machines so that you could take these things to isolated villages in third world countries to provide better prenatal care for these mothers. But what they were doing with these devices instead is they were using them to determine the gender of the children before they were born, and then if they were girls, in a lot of cases, they were aborting them. And that discussion had an impression on me, and it led me to spend many years since then thinking about the effects that technology has on society. Technology changes people's behavior. In fact, that is the entire point of technology. If it didn't change our behavior, there would be no reason to invent any of this stuff. So we invent technology. A new piece of technology always comes along, and it always has some kind of an effect on society for good or bad as people use it as they will. And public policy in recent years has increasingly become about government's attempt to try and regulate the behavior of its citizens that is being changed and enabled by technology that did not exist 5, 10, or 20 years ago in some of these cases. And so we also find that security increasingly is not simply a matter of wrapping our arms around the technology, but wrapping our arms around the policy as well, trying to get the policy right. And so it becomes not simply a technological problem, but security becomes an economic and a sociological problem. And I'm not going to go too far down that road because I know that our time is limited. But the point is that in order to get the policy right, we have to have an accurate understanding of how the technology changes the behavior of the people who use it. And the problem that we find in cybersecurity is that there are a lot of myths and a lot of mistaken ideas that have cropped up around computers and computer technology and the people who use them that need to be corrected. And so I'm here today essentially to bust a couple of myths that have become prevalent and to try and help people to gain a better understanding of sort of what the cybersecurity landscape actually looks like. And so the place to start is actually about 30 plus years ago. This is a map here that you see. This is actually what the internet looked like in about 1969. Okay, you can actually go through and you can count the number of nodes, and it's kind of interesting if you actually look up here. This was the University of Utah right there. I regret BYU is not on this map anywhere, but they actually had a PDP-11 mainframe, which was part of the internet back in those days. That's what it looked like 30 years ago when it was essentially a government and military-owned and funded system. And you flash forward about 30 years, and the internet looks like this. You realize that the number of nodes on the internet, the number of computers on the internet has increased by whole orders of magnitude. And an internet map, looks less and less like a map and more like a star chart of the universe, as the years go on. And the problem is that this map, is wildly out of date. You stare at this map and this is, it's literally like looking at the night sky. They tell us when you look at the night sky, you're looking back in time because it takes light so long from the stars to reach us that you're looking at what the universe looked like millions and millions of years ago. Well, an internet map, is very much the same thing. The minute that you look at it, it's already old and out of date because some systems have dropped off, some systems have been replaced, added, all kinds of things. So we have this constantly morphing internet universe out there, which is just changing on an hourly basis, literally. And so nobody actually truly understands what the internet looks like. So we have this problem that we're trying to secure this thing which is constantly changing and which nobody actually knows what it looks like, and nobody has control over the entire thing. Nobody owns the internet. Okay, governments don't own it, private corporations don't own it, so it becomes sort of the ultimate collective action problem. How do we get everybody together to secure this giant thing when nobody actually knows what it looks like from hour to hour or day to day? And the real problem here is that, the internet has been growing for 30 years, but internet security has really only gotten public attention and, more importantly, corporate and government attention in the last 10 to 15 years, which is a shame because the signs that security on the internet was going to be a problem were cropping up well before that. If you look at this slide, this is a floppy disk which is sitting in the Boston Museum of Science. Why would the Boston Museum of Science put a floppy disk on display? Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you ever remember handling floppy disks like that. Some of you probably do. I remember handling the old 5 1/4 inch floppies and the 8 1/2 inch floppies from way back when. The reason that's on display is because that floppy disk contains the source code for the Morris worm. The Morris worm was sort of the first big internet hack which gained public attention. It happened in 1988. Where a gentleman named Robert Morris, I believe, who was actually a son of an NSA employee, wrote the first internet worm and let it loose, and he essentially sort of crushed the internet as it was at that point, where it just ran around just taking down all of these things. So in 1988, we already had the first major public hack, which obviously had caused a lot of problems and a lot of inconvenience for government agencies. And even just before that, that's a good picture. We actually had the first case of a foreign intelligence service trying to use the internet to collect information on U.S. military plans and operations. This is a gentleman named Cliff Stoll, okay? And he was an astronomer at one of the universities in California, and his research grant had run out, and so desperate to find a way to put food on the table, he had taken a job essentially as a system administrator. And his boss came in one day and said, we have got some kind of a problem with the accounting. In those days, you were actually charged for your computer time, and they found a 10-cent error. And he was tasked with going and figuring out, where's this 10-cent error coming from? And over a course of 9 months, to make a long story short, he unraveled this mystery that led to hackers in Germany who were on the payroll of the KGB, and they were getting paid in Deutschmarks and cocaine to go and hack U.S. government and U.S. government contractor systems in Washington, D.C. to go and try and steal information. And you can read about this. It's actually written up in a book that was a New York Times bestseller. It's called The Cuckoo's Egg. And I'm not going to tell you where that title comes from. You're just going to have to read the book. It's a long and meandering explanation. But go to your local, go to the bookstore over here, go to Barnes & Noble, pick up a copy of that book and read it. And you have to realize all of this was going on in 1986. Okay? We know that foreign intelligence services and other countries were interested in using the internet and finding the potential to attack U.S. systems, 20, 30 years ago in some cases. This is not a new and recent thing. Okay, they were seeing the potential in it. And this guy, who was not a computer security expert by any stretch, was one of the first guys to go and actually sort of blow this thing wide open. So we've got this very problematic situation where security on the internet has been a problem for years and years, but none of the people who are responsible for that security really got into it until just the last 10 or 15 years. And so we have created a system that is so insecure that to secure it now, you saw how many systems were on there. To secure it now would be exorbitantly expensive, probably prohibitively expensive, to go through and rip out all of those systems and replace all of that software with something that would be secure. It's so bad that a lot of people have said the only way we're going to ever secure it is we're essentially going to have to start over from scratch and build a second internet that is actually secure. And then as everybody migrates over onto this second internet, we'll just let the first internet just kind of die and fade away. And that this would be an actual generational thing that we would have to do, and it would take 20 to 30 more years in order to be able to migrate everybody. So we are on this wildly insecure infrastructure where more and more of our other critical infrastructures are getting tied in on a daily basis. We do have, power plants, we do have water treatment plants, you name your infrastructure, telecom, all of these things are being tied into the internet. And so the internet is not becoming, you can't exactly call it a critical point of failure, but you can call it sort of a critical foundation of failure for all of these other kinds of infrastructures. And so if the internet suddenly starts having problems, there are going to be cascading effects off of the internet into some of these other infrastructures, and we have actually already started seeing some of that. There is some evidence, there are some people who believe that when the power grid in Northeast United States went down in 2003, that they believe that an internet worm was actually partly responsible for that, for leaving 30 million people without power. The power company has denied it, but if you go and you read through what was happening, you find that the computer systems for the power company were failing in sequence, and that the people who were responding to it were not electrical engineers, but they were IT support. Okay, which leads you to believe that there was some kind of a cascading failure inside their computers and not necessarily inside the other parts of the infrastructure. So this is the kind of thing that we found ourselves in the middle of this situation. And it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take a very long time to be able to get out of this. So I want now to present to you with that as our backdrop. What are these myths that I'm out here to bust, and how do we get a really good picture of who's operating in this highly insecure landscape? The first myth, which has become prevalent among the American people, as I've found, is that hackers are the primary threat to our infrastructure. Okay. Now, when I ask you, what is a hacker? Describe a hacker for me. What comes to mind? Somebody answer me. You guys speak. Okay, so here's obviously a computer science guy. All right, who else? What else you guys think when I say hacker?
Like college students.
Okay, so somebody who looks like you guys. What else? I saw another hand.
Got guys in their basements surrounded by lots of equipment, typing away.
Okay.
Drinking Mountain Dew.
Okay, yeah. Mountain Dew, the beverage of choice for the savvy hacker. Yeah, I mean, you sit here and you talk to people and you get, the same kind of answer. You get sort of a withdrawn loner, maybe a teenager who's sort of ostracized at school, sitting in the basement, can't get a date with a girl if you put a gun to her head, those kinds of things. And, that was all true largely 20 years ago, okay? And I think the picture that stands out in most people's minds, if they ever saw the movie War Games, with a very young Matthew Broderick, is they get that teenager who's trying to hack in and change his grades at school to impress the girl. I can go hack in and I can get us 2 tickets to Paris. Would you like to come? That's his way of asking her out on a date, kind of a thing. And that has persisted for a very long time. And even just in very recent years, I got this quote from a supposed computer security expert who says, for the most part, hackers, they break into corporations for one reason, status. The hacking community is a strong meritocracy where status is determined by level of competence. They say these guys are doing it sort of as a way to, sort of beat their chest and say, I'm the best. I'm the best hacker out there. My hacker kung fu is better than your hacker kung fu, and those kinds of things. And this is not true anymore. Okay, this is painfully and dangerously untrue. This is not what the hacker underground is like anymore. They are no longer hacking just to prove who is the best and the baddest. Okay, the hacker underground now is very much about one thing, and that is just money. Okay, we actually ought to stop using the term hackers, and we just ought to start using the term criminals, is what they are. This is all about money for these guys. The internet has become a giant source for them to go out and just steal money by any and all means necessary. In fact, it has gotten so prevalent that we actually call it an underground economy. Okay, do we have any economics students who are in here? Okay, I see one hand way in the back. Okay, and it didn't go very high. No, it's interesting that it very much is an economy, and the reason we say it's an economy is because there are goods and services that are being bartered, and you have very definite specialization of labor going on in there. If you ask anybody, any econ professor, how do you know an economy when you see it? One of the things that they will tell you is you see a specialization of labor. Okay, people are dividing off and they are tackling tasks that they are very good at and they figure that they have a competitive advantage in. When I say that they have goods and services available, almost anything is for sale in this hacker underground. Okay, here are a couple of things that we have actually seen posted by an Iraqi seller, okay, in the underground. Here on the top, you actually have a real birth certificate for a U.S. citizen. The name is blacked out, okay, so you can't see that. And down here you have an actual social security card. These are real scans. Somehow these guys got a hold of it. They scan in, for example, identity documents, and then they go and they sell and they trade these things back and forth. And if you actually look at these guys talking as they trade and sell, you find that they are busy saying, hey, I need a passport to get into this country. Who's got U.S. passports? Who's got Canadians? Who's got UK? Who's got whatever? I need a visa into this country. I need an ID doc for that, whatever. All of it's for sale. And anything pretty much is useful as currency, okay? They will use money. They will use pornography. They will use other documents. They will use access to hacked systems. All of it is traded back and forth. It's a giant black market underground where barter is the norm, okay? And they will go and just about anything you could ever want is totally available, all right? And in that specialization of labor, one of the things that we have seen in recent years rising up is a system called cashiering, okay? Where what these guys will do is one of the things that they will barter and trade is bank account information that they have managed to steal online. They've hacked into people's computers, they've hacked into banks' computers, whatever, and they've gotten access to people's bank account information. And what they will do is they will go and they will contact somebody who's called a cashier, and what he will do is he will take the bank account information and through various means he will go and he will drain all the money out of the accounts. And then he will take a split, he'll take his cut, and he will forward the money on to the hacker who gave him that account information, okay? And you sit here and you look at some of the amounts that they have in here, money market, $13,000, checking account, $1,100, $500. We have seen some accounts that had as much as $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that these guys were accessing and preparing to drain. And they were going to go split it in half. And these guys make so much money off of that that this is their day job. See, what happened is all those hackers from 20 and 25 years ago who were geeky teenagers who couldn't get a date, well, they grew up. And some of them actually did get married, and they ended up with a mortgage and a minivan and 2 kids and found themselves wondering, how am I going to pay the bills? Because, some some of these guys in these third world countries, they can't make a whole lot of money in other areas, and this is how they make their money. And some of them make a lot of it. Okay? So they go around and they do this kind of thing, specializing in labor, trading all of this kind of stuff back and forth, hacking it, and they've become extremely good at it. And the way that they do this, the backbone of this entire operation has now become a technology called botnets. Has anybody here heard that term, a botnet? Okay. Basically what they do is they will go and they will release a worm or some other, piece of malware that will go around and it will seize control of a lot of computers and allow them to go and control them and use them for a number of different things, not just gathering information, but also attacking other machines and doing various operations. These botnets have gotten progressively bigger over the years, okay? The first one that I ever looked at was the one that actually attacked Yahoo and a couple of other systems back in the year 2000. And, they were attacked by a few thousand systems, and we thought that was quite a lot. We are now routinely seeing botnets which have millions and millions of hacked computers under control of one person, okay? It has gotten, I'm actually going to, okay, hang on. Forward my slides here. It has given them an incredible amount of control on the internet. And it has allowed them to both engage in old kind of activities that you saw organized crime engaging in years and years ago, and some new things. This is an example of an actual ransom note sent by one hacker using a botnet against one target. And what he says, and I'll read this for the benefit of everyone who listens to the podcast. It says, "Your site is under attack and will be for this entire weekend. Send us $30,000 by Western Union to make sure that your site experiences no problems. If you send $30,000, your site will be protected not just this weekend, but for the next 12 months. Okay? He's running a protection racket. Okay? Pay me $30,000, and not only will I not crush your site, I will use my massive botnet to attack anybody else who dares to attack you. Okay? And I will protect you from all those other mean hackers out there. If you choose not to pay for our help, you will be under attack each weekend for the next 20 weeks or until you close your doors. You can always choose to see what happens and then contact us for our help when you realize you can't do it yourself. However, then it will cost you more and your site will still be down. The choice is yours as we await your response." Okay? And the problem is he's not bluffing. Okay? These guys don't bluff. They can absolutely do what they are threatening to do. When you have control of 3 or 4 or 5 million computers and you decide to launch a denial of service attack against somebody's network, he's going down. Okay, it's going to happen, and that guy is going to spend his entire weekend on the phone with his ISP and all, the FBI and all kinds of other people desperately trying to keep his site alive. But we just don't have the technology to keep a computer up in the face of 3 or 4 or 5 million machines beating on him, with denial of service attack, junk packets. So when these guys post these kinds of things and they don't get their $30,000, they turn on the attack and they blow him away. Not only because they can do what they claim they can do, but the chances of them being tracked back and arrested by the feds is very close to zero. Okay? The number of people who get arrested and jailed for this kind of activity is extremely low. All right? To give you an idea of how much power these guys have, all right, I'm going to give you some information on a recent worm that went around the internet called the Conficker worm. All right? Conficker was first detected in November 2008. It attacked Windows computers, and a broad variety of them. As of this writing, we know that it has controlled computers in over 230 countries, and I would be stunned if a few of those were not actually on this campus somewhere. And it establishes this botnet, which the guys who controlled it then would actually lease out parts of the botnet to other hackers. You don't have to build your own botnet. You can lease somebody else's. Okay, that's part of their specialization of labor. That's how some of these guys make their money is they get the botnet and they sell it to other people. But to give you an idea of how much power there was in that botnet, okay, this number right here, 6,400,000 was the number at one point of unique desktops, laptops, and servers that it controlled at one snapshot in time. By comparison, Google owns 500,000. Okay, and Amazon.com, that number you can't see down there, was about 160,000 at the time. So these guys had an order of magnitude more systems under their control and influence than Google. Okay? If you look at the unique number of CPUs that Conficker had, some computers are what you call multi-core, some are parallel processors with multiple CPUs built inside. You see, Conficker was controlling, they believe, somewhere around 18 million actual CPUs, whereas Google, by comparison, had about 1 million. Okay? And Amazon had about 320,000. Okay? And to show you how much bandwidth Conficker controlled, this chart is in the number of gigabits per second, okay, of data, that they could access and push through. Well, Conficker was 28,000 gigabits. You're actually up into terabits and terabytes per second, whereas Google was at 1,500 and Amazon was at 400. Okay, so Conficker was, at one point, the biggest internet service provider on the internet. It was bigger than any single corporation and any single government control. Okay, and Conficker was probably written by one or a small group of guys sitting in a basement, and they released it, and within a matter of weeks and months, they managed to amass more internet computing power than Google had with all of its billions of dollars and with all of the infrastructure that they have spent years and years building out and building up. Okay? That's what these hackers can do. And yet, I said at the beginning of this thing, the myth is that the hackers are the most dangerous guys out there. They are not. Okay? Because, I will tell you, if you look at what hackers do, hackers will settle for any victim. Okay? Hackers, as a general rule, don't operate strategically. Okay? They will use any method. They don't particularly care if they're detected. They use blanket tactics. They are what you call a high probability but relatively low-risk threat, if you look at this from a strategic point of view. It's a terrible thing that a U.S. citizen might lose $5,000 out of his bank account, or that one company might have its network blown away for a weekend. But on a grand scale, that's actually relatively small potatoes. In fact, if I get $5,000 drained out of my bank account, I probably can't even get the FBI to pay attention to me. Okay? So the question then is, who else is out there? Well, there are a lot of people who are out there who are engaging in these kinds of activities. You have actual organized crime. I mean, the real mob, and organized crime from around the world is engaged in this kind of thing, left and right. They are primarily taking, old methods that they had operated on and figuring out ways that they can use the internet and computers to enhance them. For example, we have seen cases where the mob will be shipping drugs, and they will be using UPS to go track packages that they're shipping, and if they think that there is an unusual delay in transit, then they won't show up at the other end to pick up the package because they'll suspect that maybe law enforcement or somebody's intercepted it in the middle. So they're watching those kinds of things. You have companies engaging in corporate espionage left and right on the internet. You have terrorists who use the internet primarily for propaganda and communication. There's always been a deep concern that terrorists would try and start using the internet to launch attacks. But at this point, it is still much cheaper and easier to just strap a bomb on somebody and send them out to go blow people up. But someday you will get some smart terrorist who may try something. You have foreign intelligence services. Okay, we know that the KGB was doing this kind of thing in 1986. It's in, the cuckoo's egg. And what are they out to do? They're out to actually steal national security information. They're out to go hack those contractors and steal information on the next great weapons platform that they can use to win a war against the United States. Okay? Why should they spend, tens of billions of dollars in research trying to keep up with us technologically when they can hack in and steal the information after we've spent the money? Okay? And the Pentagon and other intelligence services are just going crazy trying to figure out how to stop this kind of information from leaking out. And then you have the actual militaries who are doing this. And what is their purpose? Their purpose is to disrupt whole infrastructures. If they're going to get into a war with the United States, they want to be able to take down our power grid. And not just take it down, keep it down for an extended period of time. They want to be able to screw up our logistics, our traffic, turn our lights off, shut down our ports, do all of those kinds of things. And the problem is that the cost of doing this is way out of proportion. It's so low compared to the possible benefits. there is just absolutely no reason for even the poorest of countries not to be getting into this game. You know, just about every country that you can mention that is hostile to the United States, you know, if they're not already deeply embedded in this, are, you know, certainly investigating. You know, how can I get in on this action? Because someday I may face the United States and I need an asymmetric force multiplier, which is going to allow me to stay on the same field. They can't compete with the United States militarily, but if they can disrupt our infrastructures back home and tie up our military so that they can't operate effectively, then they might have a chance. So the hackers, even though they're the biggest number, and even though they're engaging in the most visible high-profile activity, they are not by any stretch the most dangerous people that we're facing. You have all of these people out there doing this kind of thing, and what the hackers do is the hackers let these guys hide in the noise. You can't see a lot of what these people are doing because they are hiding behind all of the stuff. So when we focus on those hackers, we're actually missing the big picture. The second myth I wanted to bust really quick is that personal computers are actually the primary cyber attack target. Now, I talked about the hackers going after your desktop machines. You know, your desktops, your laptops, those are valuable commodities to them. But the problem is that the internet is not by any stretch composed entirely of those kinds of devices. You know, how many people in this room have an iPhone or an iPod Touch or BlackBerry or some other kind of internet-connected device they carry in their pocket? Okay, we've got some hands going up. If you don't, you know, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, you will. Okay, and you know, this device I'm holding right here is actually, you know, this is an iPod Touch, and it's actually running a fairly complete version of Mac OS X on it. Okay, this is essentially a handheld computer, is what this is. And all of these devices can, by the right people, be hacked. And as we go forward, we're going to find that desktops and laptops make fewer and fewer, a smaller amount of the internet, and more devices like this are going to be what's going to be getting targeted. And we are talking about putting other devices on the internet, you know, refrigerators, homes, cars, all kinds of other devices are getting hooked in for the sake of convenience. And those are going to start being the kinds of devices that get targeted. Now, there is hope on this front, okay? Because as more and more of these kinds of devices get hooked in, companies are increasingly realizing that good security is good business, okay? And I'll give you an example of that, okay? There was a gentleman in Haiti in the recent earthquake who got trapped under the rubble, who happened to have, I believe it was an iPhone, in his pocket with GPS on it. And so he was actually able to use that to guide rescuers to his location and to save his life, okay? Now, if you take a look at one of those things, and you realize how much money companies make off these kinds of devices, you know, think about what would happen to the sales of those devices if it became public that some guy desperately needed to call 911, and when he dialed 911, he found out his phone had been hacked, and he got some kind of a message like that on the screen, and never actually was able to get a hold of the first responders and died as a result. Okay? The fact of the matter is that when you dial 911 on your phone, you want your phone to work. And if you think that your phone can be hacked and is unreliable, you're not going to buy that model anymore. And a lot of other people, when they hear about that, aren't going to buy that model. And so these companies are realizing, you know, yeah, these are incredibly capable devices, but there's one thing they've got to be able to do. They've got to be able to make a phone call, and we are going to lock these things down tight. Okay? And so you start seeing more and more companies having to make that move and realize that if we don't build good security into these devices, we're going to actually lose sales. Okay? Now, there are some people who think that this is a travesty, that devices like this are getting locked down tightly. I actually think this is progress, okay? Because it shows that we have corporations and business people who are starting to realize that if we don't take security very, very seriously, then not only is it going to cause them to lose business, you know, but it's going to have a very bad impact broadly on our society. So you're seeing all of those big companies starting to spend more and more and more money locking all of these devices down. And as I said, some people don't like it. That is actually the future, I'm afraid. I think that is the direction that things are going to be going. You'll always have laptops and desktops that are be hackable to a degree, but things like this, not so much. The last myth that I want to bust in the few minutes that I have here is simply that internet hacking is the most dangerous attack vector that is being used against us. Again, it certainly is the most prevalent, but it is not by any stretch the most dangerous. The reason why is because a lot of the systems that some of those other actors want to go after are not actually connected to the internet yet. Okay? If you go look at CIA and a lot of other intelligence community computers, for example, they do not connect those things to the internet. If you want to go and you want to get at them, you have to actually find a way to get somebody in the building. Okay? So you can go and you can remotely hack some of these things, but if you really want to get at some of the good stuff, you have to get in there. So here you have different methods, such as close access, you know, where you get somebody in the same room maybe. Okay, this is a problem with some things, like, for example, who here has gotten a passport in the last 2 years? Okay, a lot of you. Your international relations students always ought to have a current passport. The State Department decided that they were going to start putting RFID chips in all of U.S. passports. An RFID chip is essentially a little small radio transmitter. And they did this so that, you know, when you go through, you could just wave the passport over a machine that would remotely read the information without having to actually type anything in. Well, the problem is that there are specialized devices where I can stand in the same room, and if you don't have some kind of a protective shell around that passport, you can remotely read the information off of it without the person holding the passport knowing it's been read. Now, State Department was actually very responsive in coming up with some countermeasures for some of those kinds of things, but you're going to see RFID chips appearing in more and more products and more things, and it's going to be easier and easier to track remotely those kinds of things without actually being in the same room with them. You also have supply chain access, which is where you actually go and you penetrate the factory or get at the device before it's ever shipped to the end consumer. Okay? This is actually really tough to do. But if you can do it, the chances that you'll ever get caught, that device will ever have been discovered as being hacked, is essentially zero. You know, I talked to a vice president of a bank who shall remain nameless one time about 8 years ago, and he was bragging to me about how his company was really ramping up on IT services for the customers, and they were getting in, you know, tens of thousands of machines every year to go build out their infrastructure. And just offhand, I asked him, I said, you know, how many of those machines do you ever actually pry the cover off and look on the inside to see if it's been tampered with? And the answer, of course, is zero. And, I mean, how many people here, when you go and you buy a desktop from over there, would ever pry the cover off and look down inside to see if somebody tampered with it? You know, how many of us, even if we did that, could look in and tell? I mean, you know, it's an incredibly hard problem, and so it doesn't happen. So if I can actually get a chip or something into that machine that doesn't belong there, the chances it'll ever get found are just pretty much zero. So this is as close to a sure bet as you can ever get if you can pull that off. Then you have insider access and physical access. Insider is where you actually get somebody working as an employee inside the company or the agency or whatever. And so you realize that security is not just a technological problem, it's a personnel problem. How much do you trust the people who are working for your organization not to be screwing around with your equipment? At the agency, we kind of have a joke. We like to say that the only truly secure computer is one that's powered down, locked in a safe, and watched by an armed guard. And even then, you have to ask yourself, how much do you trust the guard? Okay. And it's absolutely true. You know, if you go and you look at the agency, and let me move through these arrows real fast. If you look at CIA, at the history of the CIA, and somebody can ask Nicholas about this, there has never been a time in the history of the CIA that it was not penetrated by a foreign power, ever. Okay? I have a list here of a number of foreign spies who are up there. You probably recognize some of the names. But this list is not by any stretch complete. And personally, I would actually be quite surprised if there were not somebody on the inside right now who is doing it. We have always been penetrated. And you think about how much time, effort, money, and training the agency pours in to defending against exactly this kind of thing, and how often we fail. So how easy is it to penetrate a company or somebody else who's not paying that much attention? Okay? And once you get somebody on the inside who has all of the clearances and has the trust of the people around him, all of the technological security measures that you put in place are meaningless. He will go through them like a hot knife through butter. It does not matter how many firewalls you have in place and all those other kinds of things. Somebody with the right accesses is going to be able to steal your information Or in a critical situation, he will be able to take down your network. You know, I had a team chief who used to say that, you know, without physical access to a network, no amount of technology is going to help you get in. But once you have physical access, if you want to take the network down, all you need is a hammer. Okay? You don't need to have the most sophisticated virus ever written. You just need to grab the fire axe off the wall and start attacking hardware and tearing it up. Okay? And this is the problem we face. It's not just a technology problem, it's a personnel problem. And there's always somebody inside an organization who can be bought, or who can be bullied, or who can be blackmailed into doing what somebody else wants to interfere with your operations. It can always be done. So this is what we're facing, and this is kind of my doom and gloom talk. Okay, there's not a whole lot of bright spots here, but there is one that I want to share with you really quick. You students at BYU are in a very interesting position. As I said when I started off with this discussion, you know, good security depends on good policy. And if you want to have good policy, then what you have to do is you have to be able to engage people in a discussion about the morality and the ethics of new technology as it's coming down the road. We are really bad about holding that discussion before the technology hits us. We usually have that discussion after the technology is already causing us serious problems. But you students here at BYU are at an institution which actually encourages you, in addition to secular learning, it encourages you to get training in moral and ethical learning. And that is what we need in order to be able to solve these security problems. We need to be able to have those discussions before the technology hits us. Okay, you're seeing with cybersecurity what happens when we have that discussion 15 years after the technology finally hits critical mass, and you see the problem that we're in. We needed to be having that discussion 10 years before it reached critical mass, and we never did. In order to be able to have that discussion, we need to have people who not only understand the technology and have the secular learning, but who also have the ethical and moral principles to lead that discussion. And that's going to be you guys, okay? And this is one of the few institutions in this country that are preparing its students to hold those kinds of discussions. And so I wanted to leave you with a couple of quotes here real quick. The first is actually one from Albert Einstein. Einstein helped create the atomic bomb. Okay, he wrote a letter to Roosevelt saying we can do this, and then by 1952 he was so appalled at what had happened that he became a vocal anti-nuclear advocate. And he said, concern for mankind and his fate must always form the chief interest of all technical endeavors. In other words, as you're doing your technological research, think about what the implications are for mankind. He said, in order that the creations of our mind shall be a blessing and not a curse, never forget this in the midst of all of your diagrams and equations. And the other quote comes from somebody, he was from John Adams, you know, who obviously never saw all of this kind of stuff, but he was remarkably prescient. He said, in vain are schools, academies, and universities instituted if loose principles and licentious habits are impressed upon children in their earliest years. Religion and virtue are the only foundations, not only of republicanism and of all free government, but of social felicity, and I would actually say security, under all governments and in all the combinations of human society. So I leave that with you as I lay out this cybersecurity landscape for you, and I say the solution to this is not strictly technological. You don't have to understand the technology in order to understand the behavior and the implications for society. And if we want to straighten those out, what is going to be needed is not more firewalls and not more antivirus programs. It's going to be people who have solid principles and a grounding essentially in the gospel in order to be able to stand up and lead that discussion. People who believe in moral relativism will never be able to do it. That's why people who believe in moral relativism will never know true security. We need people like you to stand up and lead that discussion. So.
I know that many of you have to go since it's 10 up. Please feel free to do so, but I believe that Mark would be happy to entertain some questions.
Sure.
So Mark, I'll let you just go ahead and choose whoever you would like.
Yeah, you guys, if you answer questions, make sure you speak in the mic, because it is a big up if you don't. So
Okay.
everyone-
All right.
Hey, I'm David Kramer. I've been reading a lot about contractors lately.
Mhm.
Is there a big concern about maybe contractors not having a equal level of security as maybe the government does, and there being a lot of leaks there?
Yeah, I can tell you, ever since 9/11 hit, the expansion in the intelligence community, and I got to think hard to make sure I'm not saying something I shouldn't here. There has been a great expansion in the number of people working for the intelligence community and the responsibilities that it's been asked to take on. And so in order to do a lot of that, there has been a lot more hiring of contractors to come in. I can tell you, at least in my agency, that the contractors who come in the door have the same security clearances and background as everybody else who's working there. I mean, there are actually multiple levels of security clearances that you go through, and your security clearance dictates what kind of information you're allowed to access. All of the contractors that I've worked with in IOC have the same level of clearances that I do. Obviously there's always a concern that somebody working for a contractor could also be, under the influence of a foreign power trying to steal information. But I don't think that the danger there is any greater than it is for, actual employees of the agency like me, because they all undergo the same background checks and the same things we do. So if their process is flawed and they've got people in their organization who are doing that, then we've probably got the same problem. So I'm actually not too worried about that.
My name is Jared Webb. My question is, mayhaps, I don't know if it's, well, I'll just ask it. It seems like you talk about securing the internet or securing networks, whereas the way I understand it, as far as technical vulnerabilities, those are only existent when we have a human that's inept, perhaps, using the system.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like human security is more of a problem than technical security. And that you can have systems that are completely technically secure, I should say. There are secure options, secure operating systems, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as there's a human involved, that human weakness is what causes a lot of these things to happen. Like these botnets tend to be computers run by humans that don't know how to use them very well, for example. So. I don't know, it seems like the focus should be more on human security as opposed to technical security. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah. The human security element is actually, it is always going to be a persistent problem, because as I said, there is always going to be somebody in every organization who can be bullied or bought or blackmailed or whatever. It's as old as mankind, that there's always somebody who's willing to sell out. You also always have the people who are not properly trained, who are incompetent, who don't follow the rules. That is always going to be a problem. But as for whether or not you can perfectly technologically secure a system, I'm not sure that we're there yet. I don't know how much money my agency spends on securing its computer systems, but I know it is a phenomenal amount of money. We have as stringent rules surrounding our IT security as anybody. We require agency employees to undergo training annually on all of these kinds of things, and yet, we still have problems, which happen on the system. And there is there is a term that you've probably heard if you're a computer science student. I'm sure you have. It's called a zero-day exploit. Where some hacker has gone and he has identified a weakness in an operating system that nobody else knows about yet, and he uses that to exploit it and get into the system. And so, all of the major operating system vendors are routinely having to come out with patches for their computers to go and repair these problems, because new problems are constantly being found. Will the day arrive when we can look at a system and say, yeah, it is absolutely perfectly secure, there is no way that you can possibly penetrate it by any technical means? Maybe. I'm not going to say never. I am going to say that I'm fairly confident that we aren't there. And I have actually on occasion taken bets with people where they've said, you can't hack this system, and I have literally told them, I will bet you my next paycheck that it can be done. And nobody ever wants to take me up on that bet, because suddenly when money is on the line, they start thinking, do I really know everything about this? I can tell you I've talked to some of the people working in those operating systems, for those companies who vend operating systems. None of them are convinced that their own products are absolutely technically secure by any stretch. So if they don't believe it, I'm certainly not prepared to believe it. So.
I'm Jessica Eisert. I wonder, with the attacks, the cyber attacks on Estonia and Georgia, how much does the United States feel that a cyber attack like that is something that they're worried about? Is that more of an issue than cybercrime and things like that? How do we feel about that?
Yeah. Well, I certainly can't speak for the entire United States government by any stretch. I can't even really stand up and speak for my own agency. I can tell you that if you go back and you look at some of these events that have happened over the last 10 years, you know, there have at various times been entire countries that fell off the internet, whether by hostile action or by accident. I mean, there have been cases where a ship dropped anchor and it cut a fiber optic cable, and you know, suddenly Australia falls off the internet or something. You know, it is something that is very worrisome. You know, as Valerie said in the introduction, I run war games for the agency that focus on these kinds of cyber issues. And in one of the games that we ran, and I believe I'm on firm ground sharing this with you, it was an unclassified game. One of the things that our red team, our bad guys, decided to do was they decided to attack the fiber optic cables coming into the United States from Europe. And at that time when we ran the game, if you actually looked at a map of those fiber optic cables, you found that virtually all of them coming from Europe came ashore at 2 points separated by 5 miles on the New Jersey coast. And these guys just truck bombed those points. And we consulted with some experts and figured out that if these guys had done the attack the way that they laid it out, and now I can't lay out all the details the way they did the attack, but essentially we would have lost 90% of our fiber optic connectivity with Europe. Okay, that has since been rectified. But, you know, so the blue team, who was the good guys, the U.S. government, were sitting around thinking, you know, they were having to ask questions like, do we have enough satellite capacity to go and make up for that? Do we have the legal authorities where we can suddenly start telling the telecom people, you know, you are going to start, you know, doing this so the government can maintain connectivity? It was a serious concern, and it wrapped the blue team pretty well in knots for, you know, a number of hours. And it was one of the questions that was actually left hanging at the end of the game. You know, what would we do if that kind of thing happened? It is something that people worry about very much. You know, whether or not somebody could come and crush the entire internet backbone, I think, is a question that is up for debate. I've heard people say yes. I've heard people say no. You know, the internet is designed to be a highly survivable system. It was actually, you know, conceived as a communication system that could survive a nuclear attack. You know, so if you can survive a nuclear attack, in theory, you'd hope that you could survive hackers or whoever else beating on it. So I don't think they're so worried about the entire United States falling off the internet as they are, you know, causing, you know, major disruptions at a time of crisis. You know, we're getting ready to go to war with somebody, and all of a sudden all the phones in Washington, D.C. drop out. You know, and then how does the Pentagon communicate with the White House, and what are your procedures and those kinds of things? And, you know, so the way to address those are basically to have contingency plans, but where we really fail is we don't do very well with contingency planning in a lot of cases. So that's about as far as I'm prepared to take that answer. Anybody else?
Tyrell Fitzpatrick, you mentioned having a discussion about the implications of new technologies. Where do you see those discussions happening?
Well, I can tell you one of the places that they need to happen are just at the highest levels of our government. I think that in a lot of cases, some of our government policymakers have actually shied away from those discussions because they feel like they don't understand the technology. And the point that I've tried to make is you don't necessarily need to understand the technology. What you really need to understand is the impact that the technology has on the behavior of the people. How does it change the culture? Certainly our policy makers need to be involved in that kind of a discussion. And Valerie and I talked kind of about this over dinner last night. You know, where do you have that? And if government's not prepared to have that, then we need to find ways to have those discussions with businesses, if we can. Who's, you know, cranking out these technologies? Are they doing it with a thought towards, you know, what are the moral implications of the things that they're building and deploying and selling? If nowhere else, you know, we just need to have academics who are willing to stand up and write the books and write the op-eds in the newspapers and start laying out the foundation for the discussion, saying we need to have this kind of a discussion. There's a very good security researcher out there right now. His name is Bruce Schneier. If you guys haven't, you ought to go Google his name and look up his blog. He started off as a crypto expert who got interested in just general security issues, and now he's turned into kind of a general security guru, and he writes about what are the principles and foundations needed for good secure systems. How do you make society more secure? And it's been interesting, you know, to go through and read his blog, and he's been raising that, but he's kind of a lone voice in the wilderness a little bit right now. And we need more people who are willing to stand up and say the same kinds of things and say, you know, we need less security theater, you know, meaningless things which look good but don't actually make us more secure. And we need more people who really do understand security and who are willing to stand up and lay that out on the table and kind of pressure our policymakers and decision makers to, you know, make really good decisions which may not necessarily be popular. Bruce Schneier. I believe you spell it S-C-H-N-E-I-E-R. So, anyway. All right.